السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. مقدار المفروض مسح وسنن المسح. So we continue with the chapter of wiping over socks, specifically leather socks, or those socks which fulfill the criteria of leather socks. So the subchapter deals with the fara'id, the requisites for masa to be correct. So it's saying over here, وَفَرْضُ الْمَسْحِ قَدْرُ ثَلَاثِ أَصَابِعَ مِنْ أَصْغَرِ أَصَابِ الْيَدِ عَلَى ظَاهِرِ مُقَدَّمِ كُلِّ رِجْلٍ. So it's saying over here that it's necessary to wipe the area equivalent to the 3 smallest fingers of the hand over the top part of each foot. So one begins by using 3 fingers of the hand, and starting from the toes, right, he wipes upwards. Right? So one is not going to wipe below. One is not going to wipe below the sock, under the sock. It's always going to be on top. Because in this issue, there's no such thing as logic. I mean, logic would dictate that we wipe under the sock, but that is not the case with masa on socks. Right? So we follow the Sharia and we follow what the Prophet ﷺ taught, and what the Prophet ﷺ taught is that masa is made over the sock and not under the sock. So this is the fard. Right? This is the requisite, meaning that if it is not done or it is deficient for whatever reason, then it's not permissible. The masa would not count, and thus the wudu would be incomplete. Okay. Now, if for example that part becomes wet, right, on its own, it just becomes wet on its own, by, let's say, you're doing wudu, and while you're doing wudu, it does happen that a lot of water, comes close to our feet, and at times, by the time we complete the wudu, there are some masjids where people are just splashing so much water that the water is coming onto the person's clothing and everything. So in that kind of situation, let's say water comes on to that person's footgear, socks, leather socks. Then, and if that area, the top portion, becomes wet, masa is still fulfilled. Right? The criterion, the condition of masa, wiping over the top of the sock, is fulfilled and is sufficient. And it's only done once. It's not done 3 times. Masa is done once. It is not done thrice. Okay. And again, wipe over the top, not on the side, not on the bottom. وَسُنُّهُ مَدُّ الْأَصَابِعِ مُفَرَّجَةً مِنْ رُؤُوسِ أَصَابِ الْقَدَمِ إِلَى السَّاقِ. So the author is saying that it's sunnah to initiate wiping from the toes, right, and gradually move up to the shin while the fingers are outstretched. So the fingers should be slightly outstretched, and that's how the masa is done, all the way to the shin. وَنَوَاقِدُ الْمَسْحِ. Now the author, he discusses the things that would render the masa null and void. Okay? So he's saying over here, وَيَنْقُضُ مَسْحَ الْخُفِّ أَرْبَعَةُ أَشْيَاء, that there are 4 things which render the wiping to be void, and it would break the wiping. كُلُّ شَيْءٍ يَنْقُضُ الْوُضُوء. Everything that pretty much breaks the wudu, everything that breaks the wudu would break the wiping. Right? ونزع خف ولو بخروج أكثر القدم إلى ساق الخف. The second, that to take off the sock, that also invalidates the wiping. So if a person has a sock on, he's done masa over it, right? And he removes it. So now the masa is null and void. He would need to wash his feet. And the same would apply if the majority of the foot comes out of the sock. The same ruling would apply, because once the foot comes out of the sock, then in a manner of speaking, the minor impurity, it extends to the foot. The minor impurity, hadith asghar, it extends to the foot, which would now require, washing of the feet. وإصابة الماء أكثر إحدى القدمين في الخف على الصحيح. Also, if water comes into the sock, and a lot of water comes into the sock, even if it's 1 foot, right? Even if it's 1 foot, that would also render the masa to be null and void, right? Because the sock has not done its job. ومضي المدة إن لم يخف ذهاب رجله من البرد. Number 4, when the time for wiping it lapses, then, or for example, and this is conditional, provided one does not have this fear that I'm going to lose my leg due to intense cold, right? So in that kind of situation, the wiping would not be null, because if one fears such a thing, then he is permitted to keep, the sock on until it's safe to take them off. There's no problem. And if, for example, he's offering salat and the time lapses for the salat while he's praying, then the prayer too is going to be repeated, because the prayer is now null and void. Okay. وبعد الثلاث الأخيرة غسل رجليه فقط. After that, the last 3 points, number 2, 3, and 4, require only the washing of the feet, not wudu. These are the last 3 points which I mentioned. So that means isabatul naz'u khaffin, removal of the sock, isabatul ma, water coming into the sock and making the feet wet, ومضي المدة إلم يخف ذهاب رجل من المرض, and the lapse of time, so long as he doesn't fear that he's going to lose his feet due to frostbite or whatever. So this would only require washing the feet, and that's it. His wudu is intact. Put the sock back on, and he's all good. He's good to go. Okay. And finally, ما لا يجوز المسح عليه ولا يجوز المسح على عمامة وقلنسوة وبرقع وقفازين. So now, the author, he's stating that, okay, one might use logic and rationale. That, okay, well, it's permissible for me to wipe over a sock. Is it permissible for me to wipe over my skull cap? Right? They might use this analogy, that just like it's permissible to wipe over a sock, it would be permissible for me to wipe over my topi, my skull cap. No, it is not. It's not permissible. So this is what he's saying. So وَلَا يَجُوزُ عَلَى عِمَامَةٍ, it's not permissible on an imama, a turban, وَقَلَنْسُوَةٍ, or a skull cap, وَبُرْقَعٍ, a veil, the veil such as what women would wear, or gloves. That too is something that women wear. So this would not be permissible. Right? And this is what the school of Abu Hanifa teaches. This is their ruling, that it would not be permissible on any of these 4 things. Right? As for the other schools, perhaps there may be some leeway and some dispensation in the other schools. However, in the school of Abu Hanifa, the Hanafi madhab, this would not be permissible. Inshallah, next week we will go through masa on bandages, which is allowed and which is permissible, and an important chapter, because we do get hurt, and sometimes we can't put water over over the wound, otherwise it's going to fester, it might become infected. So that kind of situation, the Sharia does give that allowance and dispensation to wipe over a cast, a splint, or a bandage. Let's stop over here.
So the feet get wet if you want to come